So how much is a kettle worth to you? It's an interesting question, right? Because depending on who you ask, you're going to get very different answers. Some people might say like 15 bucks, whatever I can find the cheapest on Amazon. And other people, especially if you're into pour over coffee or anything like that, you might say quite a bit more than that. Fellow Products makes some very nice kettles that are definitely on the upper end of that. And these two right here are the very top of the line. Now, this one right here with this gooseneck spout on it is called the Stagg. And this one with the more traditional spout on it is called the Corvo. And these two are what they call the Pro Studio versions. We'll get more into that. The Stagg costs $199 US, $229 if you add a walnut handle, and the Corvo only comes with the walnut handle as of right now and comes in at $229, so $200 to $230 bucks. And the answer to the question, are they actually worth that amount of money, is going to be highly dependent on what you value, because after all they really do is heat up water. Now, they do have some nice features besides that. We'll go through all of that, but both of these kettles were sent to me at different times by Fellow, and I have owned Fellow kettles for years. The very first pour over kettle that we got was a Fellow Stagg. I have several of these out all the time in my kitchen. I have these two on bar all the time, this one on the stovetop back here, and another one just back there that we also use. And I have a lot of experience with them. Now, the naming scheme of these types of kettles is a little confusing. Besides the Stagg and Corvo, you also have this word EKG that they throw into them. That basically means you have temperature control with this knob right here. Basically applies to everything except for their stovetop kettles. And then you have Pro versions, which have a bit of an upgraded screen and feature set. And then beyond the Pros, you have these, which they call the Studio editions, that add some nice material touches, a little bit of extra metal, as well as this nice glass top on the base. There's a couple other little changes too, with the gaskets inside and that kind of thing. So with the two we're going to be looking at today, we have the Stagg and Corvo Pro Studio Edition. That is definitely a mouthful. Now, before we get into the whole conversation of whether or not these are actually worth their very hefty price tag, let's take a quick rundown of the features on these things. You turn them on by pressing this big knob right here, and that will wake up this little display right here, and the kettle will start heating. And with the regular EKGs, the non-pro versions, that is basically all there is temperature control. There's a hold switch on the back and another switch for Celsius to Fahrenheit. That's about it. On the Pros and the Pro Studios, you get some extra features. Number one, you get a nicer looking screen that displays a clock, either analog or digital, when you're in standby mode. And then there also is a menu that you can get at by pressing this little extra button right here. Now, when you press that menu button, you have general settings, which will allow you to set the language, the clock, wireless settings, and calibration, which uses altitude to make sure that your temperature probe is working correctly. Wireless basically allows you to update the firmware via the app. Then you can set your altitude, which will adjust the max boil point for wherever you are located. That will go down as you increase your altitude. There's a pre-boil setting, which will bring your kettle to a full boil before settling down at your defined temperature if you want to disinfect your water or anything like that. You can set a hold in 15-minute increments up to an hour. So if you want it to heat and then hold a temperature for a specific amount of time. There's a scheduling feature where the kettle will automatically come on and heat to a certain temperature. We're going to come back to that one. There's a guide mode that you can put on, which will basically tell you what is the ideal brewing method for the temperature that you have your kettle set to. There's a chime, which you can turn on or off, and then you can set your units to either Celsius or Fahrenheit. Now, there is also a little bit of an Easter egg where you can take the kettle off of the base and then press your menu button and just keep spinning the knob around, and it will load into this cool little game called Bricky. It's kind of fun. Fellow puts that into a lot of their products. I kind of like that. Now, the Pro versions have all those features as well, and the Studio adds all of these nice little finish updates, metal covering on the button, the glass tops, all that stuff. Fellow kettles are designed in the US, but manufactured in China. Fellow does audit and certify their manufacturing facilities for workers' rights, all that kind of stuff. I did ask that. There are little bits of plastic, obviously, on the kettles, the top of the lid here, some components in the base, but anything that touches water is going to be metal. Now, a couple really quick stats before we move on to the more juicy stuff. Each kettle holds about 0.9 liters. For me, I found they take about 4 minutes and 20 seconds to complete their main heating cycle, but then they take about another 30 seconds to stabilize at the temperature that you've set. That's for full boil. And as far as flow rate on the Stagg for you pour over people, I found about 20 mil per second to be comfortable. If I really kind of pushed it, I could push that up to 25 mil per second. And I do find these kettles very easy and consistent to pour with on the Staggs, the goosenecks anyways, down to about 2 millisecond. Now, if you're out there saying, listen, dude, this is a little over the top for me. You know, these are just kettles, they heat water. A gooseneck is great. I can get a cheap one of those on Amazon. I can't imagine that this is really going to add to my life to the tune of $200+ I don't need those crazy features. You're really going over the edge here. I would say, honestly, that is totally fair. I never recommend anybody overextend themselves financially for coffee gear. And if none of this stuff seems valuable to you, I think that that is totally fair. A lot of the extra stuff that's going on with both of these kettles are largely just quality of life improvements, and in some cases, even just differences. So I think you don't need to be out there feeling like, oh, I'm not gonna have the best coffee possible unless I spent $200 on a kettle. You can definitely get really great coffee without spending this much. Now, I'll also say there are few things on your brew bar that you pick up and touch and interact with as often as a kettle. So if you're really into the process of making coffee, you may choose to invest a little bit more in your kettle. And I would say that's also fair. Now, what are the things that I enjoy about these kettles? I got a lot of them around. We've used them for years. Why? Well, just to be totally honest, the very first thing that caught my eye about these kettles was how they looked. I first saw them online, and they are a very eye-catching design, one of Fellow's very first designs. We bought our very first Stagg off of ugmonk.com, great website. Got my laptop bag, my note-taking system, my desk system, all from that site, all from the team at Ugmonk. It's fantastic. They don't sell Stagg kettles anymore. Great site though. And really initially it was just the fact that it was a gooseneck that looked fantastic. And that's where it all started for me. The user experience is also great, very simple to just walk up to and use, very intuitive. We've had these kettles on our kitchen counter for over 10 years at this point. I also find that they're actually very easy to use for people who are just getting into pour over. They have a little flow restrictor in here that stops the water from kind of all gushing out all at once, which can be kind of problematic with some other kettles for beginners. And they're, you know, comfortable to use and pour with. Pretty basic, really. Now, when it comes to these two, why do I use two? And why this trim level on the Pro line? And for me, that really comes down to one feature, the scheduler. Very often when I'm making coffee in the morning, I'll use the Cafe Lot robot. Sarah and I will have Americanos. We don't like our Americanos too hot. So typically I will use one kettle at a full boil and the other one at about 75, 76 degrees Celsius for the Americano water. So what I do is I have the scheduler set on both of these to come on, and this one heats to a full boil and this one heats to 76. So when I walk out in the morning, the water is all hot. All I need to do is grind the coffee, put the boiling water in the espresso machine. Then once I'm all done, I can make the Americano using another kettle that is preset to the right temperature for our Americanos. Is it a bit of a luxury? Absolutely. Does it make that whole experience a lot more seamless? Also, yes. Now, I could just do that with a pro level kettle. Why the Pro Studio? And the answer is somewhat vain and pretty simple. I like how these kettles look, and they match my Fellow Tally Pro scale. I think when it comes to stuff that you are going to give a permanent spot to in your main living space, if somebody wants to spend a little bit more to get the look that they want, I get that. Is it necessary? No, you can get away with less. Now, as much as I like having these kettles out, I like looking at them when they're off, I like using them when they're on, I like automating them to do the right thing at the right temperature. There are a couple things that I actually don't like about them. They're not perfect. At one point, you used to be able to trigger some Fellow kettles by Bluetooth from your phone. You can't do that anymore. Basically, the only thing you can do with the app is keep the firmware up to date. Not a huge deal. I can move past that. The knob on these does rock a little bit. You kind of ignore that at a certain point, but when you first get it, depending on the experience you're looking for, you may feel like that touch point is not quite where it should be. And I think at the price of these kettles, you actually can be that picky. There also is a bit of a firmware glitch with them, where if you go to fill up the kettle after it's already heated and you've used some water and put it back on, and then you go to refill it with more water, it won't actually detect the drop in temperature and then come back up. You can get around it by lifting the kettle up and putting it back on, but it's a bit annoying. Now, apparently that is going to get fixed in a upcoming firmware update. Fingers crossed on that. Hopefully that'll happen soon. There is one other thing that is actually quite a bit more annoying for me. Some electronics, I think about my little nightlight clock that I have for my kids. I can take it, it's got all its settings, I unplug it, throw it in the suitcase, take it over to the grandparents, plug it into the wall, loads up at the right time, the right alarms, turns green when it's time for them to wake up, all that stuff. Fantastic, seamless, love it. These kettles you can automate in a similar way. You can have your temperature that you like to have them set to, you can have them turn on at a certain time, and the second you go to unplug them and plug them back in, they lose all those settings and you need to reprogram it. Very annoying, especially if you are reconfiguring your brew bar often, or if you say unplug your kettle to kind of clean the counter, anything like that, it's annoying. Now, I know that Fellow would probably need to put like a little tiny battery in these things in order to change that, which may even drive up the cost a little bit. I just think at this price point, these kettles should remember their settings when you unplug them to move them. Also, this is a bit minor, but just the way I have some of my outlets in my house, they have a 90-degree flush mount plug, and I have one or two spots where that is maybe not the best configuration for the way my outlets are. One other thing that was actually a bit more of a dislike for Sarah, actually when we first got these, was she's used to this style of kettle where it pours freely and quickly, for making tea or that kind of thing. The gooseneck on the Stagg is definitely a slower pour. So if you have a tea drinker in your house, that could be a bit of an adjustment if you're looking to replace your normal tea kettle. Some people also say they're a little bit small in that regard at 0.9 liters. And that pouring speed is actually one of the reasons why we have that white Corvo sitting right there. It's very handy for making tea, in addition to these two on our other bar over there. As far as look, fit and finish, performance, I really enjoy recommending the whole Stagg line. Actually, the Pro Studio Edition, I think only consider if you're a super picky pour over person or very picky about your finishes. If you can go without the glass top, you could get away just fine with a Pro version. Overall, very nice package. But I would love to know what you think about these kettles. Is this at this price just a bridge too far for you at a kettle? Or would you maybe say, yeah, this is something that I'm going to touch and use every day. It's going to live permanently on my counter. I could see myself spending that much on a kettle. Let me know what you think in the comments and subscribe to my channel. If you haven't done that yet, that's one of the best ways that you can support me as a creator. Like and share this video too. All that stuff helps. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you next time.